things that the book deals with, and the film too, and one of the sort of shaping concepts, is that this kind of research is tremendously expensive. And the question arises, who will pay for it? And at the moment, for better or worse, there isn't any pressing need to recreate a dinosaur. And in trying to think about how that might happen, or who would pay for it, the only thing that I could think of was that it would come from a desire for entertainment.
Jurassic Park. What can I say that hasn't already been said? One of Spielberg's most famous films and my favorite film personally, so yes, I'm going to be majorly biased in this video. Full disclosure from the start, I was born 2 years after Jurassic Park came out, and so honestly I don't remember which one I watched first, but I do always remember going over to my grandmother's house to watch the first 2 movies because she had them on VHS and I couldn't get enough. Before Jurassic Park 3 came out, I remember being so desperate to see it that I grabbed one of my grandmother's empty VHSs, wrote Jurassic Park 3 on the label, and put it in the VHS player in hopes of it working. The child's mind is a mystery. In hindsight, I'm glad it never worked. As I go through the movie discussing what I like and dislike, I will be comparing it to the novel. If you didn't already know, Jurassic Park is based on a novel by Michael Crichton that was released in 1990. These first 2 videos I make will not be going over the films line by line, but comparing the big changes between the characters, dinosaurs, and events from the novel, and me gushing over moments from these films that filled a large portion of my childhood. Probably won't be too much criticism, except when it comes to the shoddy science in these movies and preferring certain pieces of the novel over the films, or vice versa. I will try to structure this in order of the events relative to the film, but I may bounce around as I discuss the characters as they are introduced. This is going to be a lot to manage, so
hold on to your butts.
First iteration.
At the earliest drawing of the fractal curve, few clues to the underlying mathematical structure will be seen. Ian Malcolm.
the novel is split into 7 iterations. Each new iteration reveals more parts of the complex system of Jurassic Park, and how small and slight changes can have massive consequences on this complex system, causing it to collapse just as Malcolm predicts. The novel begins with introducing the reader to John Hammond's company InGen, and the scientific gold rush of the late 20th century surrounding genetic engineering technology. It brings up the themes and questions that will be explored and discussed throughout the story, the idea of us playing God, control versus chaos, and the future role we could play in our demise. Complex life behaves in unpredictable ways that the human mind just cannot conceive of, because of the endless possible ways a complex system can respond to its environment in phase space. Phase space is like a map that helps keep track of all the possible states of a system. Phase space tells us both where an object is and how it's moving, essentially keeping track of all of the possible movements and states of the object. Take a pendulum, for example. The ball can only be in a finite amount of positions. The speed and position of the ball determine its point in phase space. Mechanical systems normally cannot move outside of the phase space, but Jurassic Park is not a mechanical system, as much as the staff would like it to be the case. Wu suggests to Hammond that they should make the dinosaurs more docile and slower than the ones they currently have, so they are safer to manage, because Jurassic Park is a complex system, much like the weather, and therein lies the problem. You can predict the weather a day or two ahead rather well when measuring precipitation, but after that, good luck. Wu also explains how they had to guess how big the animals would get and build these enclosures with these rough estimates in mind. When you introduce a complex life into any system, trying to predict that system in phase space is impossible. Complex life is highly dynamic, non-linear, and sensitive to initial conditions. There are simply so many factors involved in complex life that unless we can map the entire universe and all of its laws of physics into a computer simulation, we will simply never be able to accurately predict nature. The introduction gives a very much "you're probably wondering how we got into this mess" vibes, as the book reveals part of the ending with InGen filing for bankruptcy following the InGen incident, as the novel calls this whole event. The first iteration is actually repurposed for the beginning of the Lost World film, so I will discuss that section in my video on the Lost World, but I can't pass up the perfect titles for each section, so prepare yourselves. I do love Crichton's slow buildup of mystery in Costa Rica surrounding the island before we are completely introduced to it, and the immediate foreshadowing of animals having already gotten off the island with the compies, which involves a very disturbing scene involving compies, a baby in a crib. If you know, you know. If you don't, go read the book. The novel has many gruesome, horrifying sections, Nedry's death in particular, because both Jurassic Park books are adult techno thrillers at their cores, as opposed to the PG-13 family-safe adventure, this isn't meant to be a criticism. The movie still gets across the themes and messages of the book with some pretty disturbing animal attacks, despite having to hide most of the blood. Jurassic Park, and to some extent its two sequels, at the very least agreed with Crichton's theme of humanity's arrogant belief that we can control nature. But reading the novel again makes me realize that if Universal wants this franchise to have a future, they need to lean more into what the whole point of these movies was and the horror element that comes with it. The animals aren't meant to be fragile pets who need our saving. They're a threat to us and to our present day world. That's the whole point of the story. The World Trilogy became one giant advertisement for PETA and how we should learn to live with the dinosaurs. The complete wrong message. Both versions begin with an incident in the park, generating major concern among Hammond's investors, which prompts an on-site inspection. The novel reveals that there have been quite a few deaths in the park's construction before this point, so this is a natural boiling point. While the film doesn't mention any other deaths, Muldoon briefly brings up them having to change the way they feed the raptors, but no other mentions of any other deaths or major injuries. The film begins showing us the incident, with Muldoon being the first major character shown on screen, played by the great late Bob Peck, no relation to Josh. The cage coming through the trees, almost like an animal, is fantastic. Spielberg's opening perfectly encapsulates the tone being set for the rest of the movie, and it is phenomenal. Robert Muldoon, character-wise, is a bit different. Don't get me wrong, he is great in the movie, but he is much more fleshed out in the novel. He has a bigger role actively participating in the park's operations and actually showcasing his expertise in wildlife management. He also has a sense of humor, which is missing in the film. His favorite thing to ask Gennaro in the books is like to live dangerously. It's pretty funny. He successfully tranquilizes Rexy, who is about to eat Tim. He gets cornered by a pack of raptors and lives to tell the tale. He gets a hold of a rocket launcher from Nedry's Jeep and blows up a velociraptor. Yeah, that moment from Jurassic World is actually in the book. I was shocked to learn this as well. The novel begins after the opening raptor mauling at a clinic in a fishing village on the west coast of Costa Rica, following Dr. Bobby Carter as she contemplates living in a place that constantly rains. The man who is mauled by the raptor is being life-flighted to Costa Rica in an attempt to save his life. Ed Regis, a character combined with Gennaro in the film, is introduced in this scene, telling Dr. Carter that his people can't fly the helicopter over the mountains to San Jose in the storm to take the injured worker to a real hospital, so he spazzes out and dies on Dr. Carter's table. Whenever the kid that got mauled in the novel says "Raptor" to Dr. Carter, it always made me think of the beginning of 1998's Godzilla.
Gojira. Gojira. Gojira.
Second iteration. With subsequent drawings of the fractal curve, sudden changes may appear. Ian Malcolm.
The next section of the book's second iteration is split into two scenes for the film for some reason, and a bunch of stuff is left out. Right after the incident in the film, we cut to and are introduced to Donald Gennaro, who's arriving in an amber mine owned by Hammond in the Dominican Republic, incorrectly believing Hammond to be there. And oh boy, speaking of characters that got absolutely shafted from book to screen, I cannot believe how different Gennaro was when I first read the book. In the film, Gennaro delivers exposition to the audience through the miners about Hammond's situation following the raptor mauling, and the lawsuit they received from the workers' family, because the attorney Bob Morrison doesn't exist in the film to explain the situation to the audience through Alan and Ellie. The novel introduces Gennaro in a much different way. We're given more details about Donald and his law firm's affiliation with Hammond in the park, and it's also revealed that Donald has a wife and a daughter whose birthday is missing to inspect the park. And actually, come to think of it, every character in the novel has a fleshed out backstory which kind of wasn't brought into the film. In the book, Gennaro undergoes actual character growth and demonstrates heroism. He works with Alan and Ellie to survey a raptor nest and helps prevent a boat carrying raptors from reaching the mainland, though Gennaro does kind of require being personally threatened by grants, since Gennaro's law firm helped fund the park. In the film, Gennaro abandons Lex and Tim in their Land Cruiser and flees to a restroom where he's eaten by a T-Rex, a huge downgrade. In the novel, Alan gets asked questions about Hammond and the funding he received from him by attorney Bob Morse, who visits their dig site, as opposed to the film where Hammond personally comes to see Alan and Ellie in Montana, while in the novel they simply talk on the phone with Hammond after Bob is left. Alan Grant is a mixed bag compared to his book counterpart. He's similar in some ways and different in others. He's similar in that he's old school. He believes all the real work in science is done outdoors with your hands. He hates computers, which he says verbatim in the book and movie. He's very dedicated to his craft. Both book and movie Alan initially refused Hammond's offer because they both just dug up a new raptor, which should be a Deinonychus and not a velociraptor, but we're not going to get into that. And a further financial incentive is required to pique his interest. In the books, Alan has a beard, is widowed, and is not in a relationship with Ellie, who is instead just a student, and shocker, he actually likes kids. I think the film changing this to him not liking them in the beginning was a better choice in my opinion. Actually giving Alan an arc to go on instead of just being a casual observer mentor figure that he is in the book. Nothing wrong with the mentor archetype, but I'll never pass up a character being given extra depth and another fault to overcome. Ellie is relatively the same for the most part, with the exception of not being in a relationship with Alan and instead being engaged to a physicist from Berkeley. Modern Hollywood would like to pretend that the idea of a strong, independent woman was invented back in 2012.
Nobody had ever put a woman in the lead of an action movie because it wouldn't work. We were told. Girls and boys can both identify with a male lead, but boys cannot identify with a female lead.
Oh, absolutely.
And it just makes me so happy every single time I see a movie come out that just blows through every single one of those beliefs and proves that it is just a lie to keep certain people out of the movie.
You're so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
But Ellie would definitely fit into this criteria. The difference is she's not an overbearing character in this regard. She does have 2 lines which would fall into this category, and they are cringe, but the difference is outside of those 2 lines. Throughout the rest of the film, she is resourceful, fit, and intelligent, but she is by no means an all-knowing invincible Mary Sue. Both versions of Ellie are proactive and very hands-on like Alan, which makes them being in a relationship in the film not as big of a stretch. Ellie's character gets warped and twisted in this movie a bit. She has some things from the novel taken from her, but then she is also given additional stuff to do. The beginning of this movie alone is so many noticeable changes Spielberg made from the books. The whole subplot of Compy spreading across Central America from Nublar and causing trouble is cut from the first film completely. He streamlined it and took out a lot of the investigating done by minor characters that are not on Nublar. I do want to take a second to commend Spielberg's opening despite the drastic changes, and I want to appreciate how proper scenes of dialogue between characters are done. He was able to compound most of the important relevant information that was going to be brought back later on from the novels into these first 3 introduction scenes without making it feel too unnatural. Ellie walking into the trailer mid Alan and Hammond meeting while calling Hammond a jerk because she doesn't realize it's the guy who's been funding their dig site is the kind of dialogue I really appreciate.
Shouldn't stop to tackle, but
Side tangent incoming. Dialogue scenes in modern films feel so unnatural. Real human interaction involves slip-ups, mispronunciations, misremembering, and most importantly, people talking over and interrupting one another. I'd be stuttering and mispronouncing a lot of words in this video if I didn't script my thoughts. It'd be a shamble mess, much like my mental state. I do still mispronounce stuff and leave it in though, to be fair. Modern movies don't like using elements like this, but they are absolute gold for comedic and dramatic material. Having one character deliver a line of exposition, then having another, and then another, like robotic drones, just letting everyone get in a word with no emotion, no drive, no inner conflict, which could paint a character as sympathetic who doesn't deserve a single ounce of it. It's so weird how the quality of stories in the visual medium can change so drastically through very subtle details that help sell a story and characters to a viewer, to get them invested. Tangent over. Hammond is one of the characters that is most changed from his novel counterpart, played brilliantly by the late Richard Attenborough, older brother of famous naturalist David Attenborough, whose voice you have definitely heard because he's narrated every nature documentary under the sun. Richard was Hollywood royalty by the 90s and had, for all intents and purposes, retired from acting all the way back in 1978, having only directed up until Spielberg pleaded with him to return to the screen for the role of John Hammond. Richard plays Hammond with a naive, childlike sense of wonder. He's a dreamer, which is much more tragic than his novel counterpart, who is literally eaten alive, which probably gives you a sense of the type of character he is in the books. Book Hammond is shrewd and callous. He says out loud he brought his grandchildren to the park to get their mind off their parents' divorce, but in Hammond's head later, we find out he brought them because he thought seeing their joy would help convince Gennaro not to shut the park down. Most of Hammond's novel traits were inserted into Gennaro in the film, or his nephew, Peter Ludlow, in the second film. I think both characters serve the same purpose in the story. The true personality behind the creator of the park was never going to change the central theme of the story and the ultimate fate of the park. Novel Hammond says, and I quote,
"From a business standpoint, that makes helping mankind a very risky business. Personally, I would never help mankind."
Dodson! 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 We've got Dodson here! See, nobody cares.
Lewis Dodson. Dodson is only briefly in the first novel, but has a whole other scene where he delivers an exposition dump to the Biosyn board, which was cut, and in my opinion, this was definitely for the best. Dodson and Biosyn were only going to be relevant for the beginning of the movie, to give context, and the Dodson-Nedry meeting gives us all the information we need. The full context with Dodson talking about InGen creating little pet dinosaurs, eating only InGen pet food to his board of investors, was thankfully cut.
Yeah. I'm getting used to it.
I have a bit of things I really want to say about how Universal completely dropped the ball with this character in Dominion, but I will be biting my tongue until my video on that movie. The film skips over Alan, Ellie, and Hammond meeting Gennaro at Shoto, and the crew picking up Malcolm in Dallas. In the novel, the crew also picks up Nedry in San Jose, but in the film, Nedry seems to already be on the island when Hammond's group arrives. Funny enough, Nedry is one of the most faithful characters to his novel counterpart. He has the same personality, same backstory, and the same fate. Slight differences here and there, but overall Nedry's whole story was lifted straight from the page. In the book, Nedry and Dodson meet in a coffee shop in the San Francisco airport instead of an outside restaurant in Costa Rica. It's also unclear if Nedry in the film was also recording his conversation with Dodson like in the books, but since it would never come back up again, Spielberg must have decided not to include it. Now I want to briefly discuss the star of the show. You all know who I'm referring to. Dr. Ian Malcolm is a key figure in the first two Jurassic Park movies and both of Crichton's novels. He is Crichton's self-insert preaching caution. This definitely wasn't the plan back in 1990 when Jurassic Park was released, but it's what happened as Crichton had originally killed off Malcolm at the end of the novel. He then retconned this for the sequel novel and brought him back, having the character say,
"I was sorry to cut short the celebrations in mathematics departments around the country, but it turned out I was only slightly dead."
Because the character was insanely popular in the novel, made even more so by Jeff Goldblum's portrayal of him in the film. Also, Spielberg and Universal offered Crichton a boatload of money to write a sequel so they could adapt it into another film.
Third iteration. Details emerge more clearly as the fractal curve is redrawn. Ian Malcolm.
Once the group arrives on the island in the film, they are met with a Brachiosaurus, while the sauropods the group sees on their arrival in the novel is the Apatosaur, aka the Brontosaurus, which they eventually use in Jurassic World. In the film, the group sees the dinosaurs and are blown away. The acting from the whole cast is phenomenal. The actors really help sell the CGI dinosaurs, despite the Brachiosaurus being one of the more dated shots in this movie. Yes, people were blown away by this effect back in '93, but so many people praised the Brachiosaurus effect without acknowledging the great character work being done in this scene. Alan Grant has spent his life studying these creatures, and Sam Neill shows through his eyes how utterly bewildered he is. Even Malcolm, who is already against the park, can't hold back a smile. In the novel, the group gets set up in their own hotel rooms, and then their tour begins in the auditorium, where they go over a graph of infant mortality rates provided by the Public Health Service in San Jose, where there are reports of a new lizard biting infants in villages along the west coast. In the film, the group gets to the visitor center, and Hammond begins the tour immediately with no room check-ins. We get some more great ad-lib dialogue.
So what are you thinking?
We're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
This line of dialogue is a playful nod to Phil Tippett, a legendary visual effects artist and dinosaur expert who worked on Jurassic Park. Tippett's original role was to create stop-motion animation for the dinosaurs. However, during production, Steven Spielberg decided to use CGI technology developed by George Lucas's ILM Studios instead of the stop-motion for many of the dinosaur effects, after their team created test footage of a CGI T-Rex walking, which blew Spielberg away. Tippett famously remarked, "I think I'm extinct," when he saw how revolutionary and lifelike the CGI was. Spielberg later included this sentiment in the form of Malcolm's line. Despite the shift away from stop motion, Tippett remained integral to the production, contributing as a dinosaur supervisor and helping ensure the animation and movement of the CGI dinosaurs were realistic. Back to the story. The film group goes into an auditorium as well, but they instead watch a kid-friendly video going over the basics of how Hammond's company was able to recreate the dinosaurs. Most of Mr. DNA's lines in this video are taken directly from Dr. Henry Wu in the novel, who we will see for one brief scene directly after this video. Dr. Henry Wu, he's Hammond's pupil in both versions. His backstory with Hammond is very fleshed out in the novel. I will talk about the movie Wu more once we get to the Jurassic World movies, since he has more screen time there. In the novel, when he is introduced, he takes the group on a full tour of the labs where they meet a young raptor. He stays on the island and tries to help the rest of the staff get the park back in order after everything starts going wrong. Once Wu points out that they've only been running on auxiliary power and that power has gone out, the raptors attack the skylight, attempting to reach Dr. Harding and an injured Malcolm, while Ellie and Muldoon are outside distracting the other raptors at the fences, for Alan to turn the power back on. Once Harding tells Wu that the raptors have left the skylight, Wu rushes out of the door to warn Ellie and Muldoon, and he is eaten by one of the raptors. Wu was definitely much less deplorable than Hammond, but he ultimately was the creator of these dinosaurs, a modern-day Prometheus. He embodies the cautionary tale of human ambition unchecked by ethical foresight, a key theme in many interpretations of the Prometheus myth. In the movie, he shows them a raptor hatching, and then he is gone for the rest of the film. Not much, but he does get to help prompt the main thematic quote.
I'm simply saying that life, finds a way.
The group gets a taste of the velociraptors in both versions around this time. In the films, the raptors are completely surrounded by concrete with a viewing platform above them and the group can only hear them, while the raptors in the novel are just behind a traditional electric fence. And they ambush the group like Hal Grant describes the child in the beginning of the film, fully revealing themselves and willingly hitting the fences from the left and right. In the movie, Spielberg conceals his adult raptors fully until... which is much more effective. The raptors for the most part in the films and novels act the same way. The novel designs of the tiger stripes weren't added until The Lost World. I sound like a broken record bringing up The Lost World again, but it's simply because a bunch of the elements from the first novel that Spielberg didn't use in the first film, he brought back for The Lost World, or were used by future directors for their films. There is a subplot, which is not in the movie, where the tour group spots a bunch of wild raptors escaping on the supply ship that is leaving the island, which the group wants to warn the others back in the control room about, but the power shuts down and the T-Rex attacks their cruisers before they are able to, which adds another sense of urgency to Alan and the kids' motivation for wanting to reach the visitor center fast so they can recall the supply ship. The raptors are in larger numbers and get more kills in the novels, while in the film Muldoon lets us know that 8 were originally bred for the park, but the big one killed all but 2 of the others, so there are only 3 alive by the time the group comes to tour the island. Or so they think. The lunch scene is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. Even before reading the novel, it was one of my favorites. Mainly because a lot of Malcolm's novel speeches are condensed into this one single conversation, which makes this scene even more impressive with the additional context. Malcolm takes a giant backseat once he's injured in the films, so they condensed all of his speeches into this one scene. He helps Ellie navigate the maintenance tunnels, but other than that, he just lays around with his shirt open, telling everybody I told you so. He is crippled for the rest of the movie, so it was nice that Spielberg turned his one action scene into a heroic moment instead of an act of desperation that it is in the books. In the novel, Malcolm is slowly dying after the T-Rex attack and still delivers monologues while deliriously drugged up. I don't know if people would buy him giving long, profound monologues while drugged up. We then get introduced to Hammond's grandchildren. Normally the kids in these movies are annoying, but that isn't the case here. Something that will not remain a pattern in this franchise, unfortunately. In the novel, Gennaro is outraged that Hammond brought his grandchildren. This is where we get his "this isn't a weekend excursion" speech. They did actually film a scene right after the children are introduced where Hammond explains that their parents are going through a divorce, but it was cut. Spielberg already has a line addressing the divorce earlier in the movie, so cutting this scene just helps with the pace. The kids show clear signs of a neglected home. Tim's hero complex with Alan is a big indicator. The siblings have completely different interests and are adversarial towards each other in the beginning. It's almost like Spielberg trusted the audience would pick up this line, all of the subtext that followed through the kids' behavior, and didn't need to have 2 whole other scenes emphasizing this point. Lex and Tim's ages are swapped for the film. Lex is the younger one in the novel, and to be honest, her novel counterpart is genuinely annoying, which is accurate for an 8-year-old, but holy cow, film Tim is a saint in comparison. Besides her irritatingly loud screaming, the film version of Lex is much more tolerable. Tim in the novels is the dinosaur expert and the hacker, but they split these 2 roles between the kids in the films, which works much better and gives them both something to contribute. As the tour is about to begin in the film, we cut to the control room. Ray Arnold, portrayed by Sam Jackson, is named John Arnold in the novels. They changed this because I guess having 2 Johns in a group of like 6 people could confuse the audience. His story, like Nedry's, is relatively the same, except in the film his death scene is not shown. In the novel, we get to experience Arnold's death through his own eyes, which is done horrifyingly well by Crichton. Some say killing him off early was meant to establish the danger of the park, making anyone a potential victim, allowing more time to develop Grant and the kids, and since Jackson wasn't as well known of an actor at the time, it was meant to add a shock factor. This was released a year before Jackson's breakout performance in Pulp Fiction, so he wasn't a household name yet. These are all great points, but the reality is Arnold's death scene was supposed to be shot, but the set was ruined by Hurricane Iniki, the hurricane that was hitting Hawaii at the time they were filming back in 1992, which they filmed for the shots of the tropical storm in the movie, a nice coincidence. Not filming Arnold's death scene did lead to a great scare later on. The car tour the group goes on is very similar in structure, but the details are a bit different. In the film, the first enclosure is a Dilophosaurus, which the group doesn't see any of. A good idea to save until Nedry's death and to immediately show Malcolm's theory at work to the group themselves. In the novel, the first enclosure they go past is the Hypsilphodont paddock, which they see none of. The Hypsilphodonts do not appear in the films. Their distant cousins, the Dryosaurs, are in all the Park Builder games, and their other cousin, the Iguanodon, are featured in the Jurassic World Evolution games. In the novel, when the group drives past the Dilo paddock, Tim sees only one drinking at the stream. The Jungle River Cruise and the Aviary were completely cut from the Jurassic Park film. In the novel, they then proceed past the Triceratops, which are not sick. Then, the novel and film converge once again to head to the T-Rex paddock, which then causes another divergence. Malcolm's theory at work in a meta sense. I was surprised that that Rexy was shown full on pretty early in the novel. After reading it multiple times, it blows my mind that Crichton chose to do this. In the novel, Rexy takes the bait in broad daylight, eating the goat in full view of the group. In the film, Rexy does not come out in the daylight. Again, Spielberg chooses to build suspense over superficial violence, also validating Malcolm's theory at the same time. None of the animals are showing up when the tourists drive by. It's brilliant. This is also where we get Malcolm elaborating on the butterfly effect like he does on the helicopter in the novel. The tour then heads towards both versions' sick dinosaur. Alan jumps out of the car to get a chance to see the sick Triceratops. One noticeable thing left out during the sick dinosaur scene is Ellie figuring out what is causing the sickness in the Triceratops. The novel features a sick Stegosaurus as opposed to a sick Triceratops. They are two of the most recognizable herbivore dinosaurs in pop culture, so either one is a suitable choice in my opinion. Stan Winston's team absolutely blew away the actors. All of their reactions were genuine. The sick Triceratops will never age thanks to Winston's phenomenal lifelike animatronics. There is an error by omission in the film, but the plotline is not brought up again and is only thrown in to show that the park is having an issue with maintaining the health of the animals. The stegos in the books were mistakenly ingesting the West Indian lilac berries alongside the gizzard stones by the stream, that they normally swallowed to allow digestion. This accidental ingestion of the poisonous berries led to their illness. I'm assuming this is the same in the movie with the Triceratops, they just never address it, which I find odd, because all it would have taken was a thrown away line by Ellie. Dr. Harding is never shown again either, because Spielberg takes most of the staff off the island before the power goes out. Dr. Harding is played by an executive producer on the film. I'm surprised he's only in one scene, to be honest. Ellie stays behind with the sick Triceratops as the rest of the group continues back to the visitor center since they have to cut the tour short due to the storm.
Fourth iteration. Inevitably, underlying instabilities begin to appear. Ian Malcolm.
As the tour vehicles are coming back, Nedry is putting his full plan into effect to steal the embryos, shutting down the park security, which shuts down everything including the fences. I love Alan's "oh what did I touch" as the vehicle shut down, still believing the technology has it in for him. Arnold and the others in the control room are confused by all the fences beginning to fail, so they head over to Dennis's desk. Shout out to Oppenheimer. Dennis hits the sign pointing towards the east dock. Now he has no idea which way to go, leading to a nice bit of physical comedy. Another shout out to Oppenheimer. When I was a kid, I had no idea who this guy was, and while it's not exactly subtle, comparing him and the work his people have done to Oppenheimer, the man who spearheaded the creation of the atomic bomb, is very appropriate. In both characters, there's a recurring theme of scientific ambition colliding with moral responsibility, and a tragic realization that their creations, although groundbreaking, are far beyond their control and come with unforeseen consequences. The tour vehicles have stopped right in front of the goat from earlier. The build up to Rexy's full introduction has since been ripped off by most of its sequels and many other monster films. While not exactly realistic, as the real-life T-Rex's legs were built to absorb shock, which would reduce vibrations and noise, it was designed for cinematic impact and to build suspense, and it achieved both. A very clever practical effect devised by special effects supervisor Michael Lentieri. Lentieri used a guitar string attached underneath the dashboard of the car where the cups were placed. The string was connected to a mechanism that allowed it to be plucked like a musical instrument. And this is where I have to give a hot take. Or maybe it isn't. I guess I'll find out in the comment section. But I think it's safe to say that the build-up to the Rex attack is more iconic than the Rex attack itself. The goat being gone, the goat leg falling on the rooftop, the T-Rex's hand on the fence signaling that it can get out. The first time we see the T-Rex's head fully, it's real. Stan Winston's incredible creation at work. The audience feels and sees exactly what the characters do. The attack has some issues which kind of knock it down a peg for me as opposed to the build-up itself. Jurassic Park perfects one of the ultimate goals of entertainment, the ability to immerse its audience. The build-up suspense ultimately helps immerse the audience into the story, and it affects how willing they will be to overlook flaws and inconsistencies. Let me explain further. The animatronics done by Winston are incredible as they are in this whole film and the first three Jurassic Park movies in general. A lot of people quote Terminator 2 or Hook as the go-to for CGI pre-Jurassic Park, but funny enough, the first live-action film to feature CGI was a story written and directed by none other than Michael Crichton himself back in 1973, Westworld. You've probably only heard of the remake they made on HBO, which immediately became shit after season 1.
In here we were gods, and you were merely our guests.
Not even Floki from Vikings could save that show. By the time Jurassic Park debuted, CGI had already been a tool for filmmakers for 2 decades, but it was Steven Spielberg's film that fully realized its potential, using it to create photorealistic, dynamic creatures integrated seamlessly into a live-action environment. It had these special effects, and honestly, that's all it really needed back in '93, because people were blown away by this alone. This is what really sets Jurassic Park apart from other blockbusters. It had an actual message to convey. Universal fundamentally misunderstood the underlying message of this movie. My nice way of saying they simply ignored it because this movie's whole message is antithetical to the idea of a sequel to begin with. There are two T-Rex in the first novel, Rexy and a juvenile. The juvenile, which was cut from the film, kills Ed Regis, a character who was also cut from the film, but whose role of abandoning the kids when the Rex attacks was given to Gennaro. Our Giga Chad lawyer getting shafted in the adaptation again. While Rexy in the film would go on to star in all three Jurassic World films, Book Rexy was not so lucky. As it is revealed in the Lost World novel that Nublar was napalmed by the Costa Rican government following the events of the first book. The film canon decided to keep Nublar intact until Fallen Kingdom and never bring up Sorna again after JP3 outside of a throwaway line in Dominion, which creates even more plot holes in the world building and canon, but we will talk about that when we get there. Alan and the kids end up in the Jungle Cruise in the books, being chased by Rexy the whole way back to the visitor center. Funny enough, Rexy doesn't get any human kills in the novel, which is ironic. Malcolm would technically be a kill if he had stayed dead of his injuries. So the T-Rex escapes its cage and we get another very famous shot from this film. The darkness and the rain really help sell it. Darkness hides imperfections, which was a very smart decision here because it is one of the very reasons this scene holds up almost 32 years later. The T-Rex absolutely wrecks the kid's car as Alan and Malcolm are powerless to do anything. In the film, Alan grabs a flare out of the back to try and avert the T-Rex's attention, and it seems to be working until Malcolm joins him with his own flare and the T-Rex gives chase. Malcolm runs to the restroom where Gennaro is hiding, and in her attempt to try and get Malcolm, Rexy destroys the bathroom. Ian is lucky to get covered by the bathroom debris. In an odd sense of irony, the bathroom collapses around Gennaro and the T-Rex eats him. This scene is great, I only have a couple gripes with it. The changing landscape in the T-Rex paddock was an error I eventually realized, but Spielberg's tension in this scene is so good most people don't realize it at all. Spielberg wanted the Jeep in the tree like in the book, and I guess he didn't think the T-Rex could throw the Jeep high enough. The T-Rex is big, but being able to lift the Jeep high enough to get it stuck in a tree is a bit much when you compare Rexy's size to the tour vehicle, but they could have set up the scenario better. My biggest problem is with the T-Rex's vision, and how the film tries to sell in the beginning that this is a fact of paleontology when this has absolutely no grounding in fact whatsoever. The explanation of the site based on movement in the novel is explained because of the reptile DNA used to fill in the genome of all the dinosaurs. And even this is a stretch because not even reptiles have vision that is solely based on movement. While many reptiles are particularly good at detecting motion, their vision is not limited to detecting moving objects. The visual capabilities of reptiles vary widely across species, but they typically involve a combination of movement detection, color perception, and sensitivity to light, which does make the flare a great tool to use as Rexy's vision may actually be affected by it. Back at Control, Arnold finds that white rabbit and tells John without the fat man, Jurassic Park is kaput. Nedry heads out into the park and not even 5 minutes later he is dead because he didn't bother to learn which dinosaurs could spit venom into his eyes. The scene definitely has much more levity than its novel counterpart, mainly thanks to Wayne Knight. Nedry drops the Barbasol can down the hill as he gets blinded by the Dilo, and this same can is randomly brought back 5 films later as a pointless memberberry scene which raises even more questions. Sorry, holding back these rants for 3 more movies is going to be painful. In the novels, Nedry is picked up by his head in the jaws of the Dilophosaurus, something the one in the films definitely could not do. Before all the Jurassic World films, I had always had the headcanon that the Dilo in Jurassic Park was simply a younger one, but nope, it would seem in the film canon the Dilophosaurus is in fact the size of a golden retriever, or at least the ones InGen made are. The Dilophosaurus was another victim of movie magic changing its accuracy, being too small, having a frill, and spitting venom, none of which is accurate. To be fair to Spielberg and his team, the Dilophosaurus in the movie was designed before contemporary research was available, and the DNA gaps being filled in by reptiles gives them some more leeway as well. Experts have since discovered Dilophosaurus to be around 20 feet long. It was a seriously formidable macro-predator, meaning it would not fit in Dennis Nedry's Jeep at all. In the books, it's not entirely clear if Nedry is going to leave with the embryos or if he was simply going to try and slip back into the control room afterwards, which was his plan in the novel. And this is going to be a point where I do have to critique the novel, because Nedry's idea to come back after having suspiciously shut down the systems while 15 embryos had gone missing was
not a great plan.
Henry was going to discover what Nedry had done already. Henry had already noticed a spike in the temperature of the freezer holding the embryos while going to look up the DNA strands used in the dinosaurs that were breeding. Alan and Lex make it to the bottom of the newly formed cliff in the T-Rex paddock, and Alan decides to go help Tim, who's still in the Jeep that's stuck in the tree. Alan goes up in the tree for Tim, and both have to escape the falling Jeep. This is the same in the books, except Tim wakes up in the tree and has to escape the falling Jeep by himself. Ellie and Muldoon arrive at the T-Rex paddock to find one car gone, Gennaro's remains, and Ian badly injured. Ellie sees the other cars over the side of the cliff in the paddock, the same paddock that the T-Rex just apparently strolled out of 10 minutes ago. I'm never gonna let that one go. Ellie goes down and finds Alan and Tim's footprints leading away from the car. Ian's taking a nice nap until he hears the footsteps from the T-Rex. Another thing the preceding movies will forget. Jeff just brings so much levity to this character in this movie in general. Malcolm in the books is eccentric, but Jeff Goldblum adds his own weird charm and humor to the character. The one difference of note is that Book Malcolm is no hero. He gets picked up and thrown by Rexy while attempting to flee from the car once he realizes Alan has no plan. Goldblum revealed in interviews that he directly influenced the decision to make Malcolm much more heroic in the film. Ellie, Malcolm, and Muldoon get chased by Rexy, another scene that is very well done. Rexy in the side view mirror as Malcolm starts crawling towards the front of the Jeep to get away from her. Muldoon is then unable to shift gears, heightening the tension. The actors absolutely sold this. But lucky for them, Rexy's heart just wasn't in it. She just had a goat and a lawyer, so she must not have seen the extra running as worth it. Which is actually a nod to Malcolm in the books talking about the Rex attack after the fact while drugged up on morphine. Alan and the kids climb a tree and we get some nice back and forth between Alan and the kids as he comforts them in order to help them get to sleep. Underneath this, Alan is contemplating his life leading up to being stuck on a dinosaur island with 2 kids. Like Alan says in the scene, he does have to evolve, but not just to dinosaurs being alive again, but evolve into being the one thing he has run away from up to this point. Being a parent. One of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. John contemplates his life leading up to the park, talking about his flea circus where he would use strings to create the illusion of the fleas doing tricks, and how this circus act eventually led to him yearning for something more ambitious. John represents that creative vision that brings great ideas to fruition, and everybody else that he brings on to help with his vision may not share these same values or put the same faith into helping make his dream a reality. He mirrors many real-world figures whose greatest creations were taken, warped, and twisted into something else while they were still alive or once they were in the ground.
So we have a large group of ideas and characters and books and all kinds of things we could
go on making Star Wars for the next 100 years.
Ellie reiterates her and Malcolm's points from the lunch scene earlier, telling John how they all ignored the warning signs, still refusing to accept that after all of the years of dedication, careful planning, and money spent on this, his greatest dream came to fruition. It was all still just an illusion, just like his flea circus. Alan refuses to go to the island at first, but the promise of further dig site funding, compounded with the initial awe and wonder of the resurrected creatures, made them all put their guard down. Their arrogance and inability to understand the things they were bringing back ultimately led to the park's downfall. Novel Wu can barely pronounce the names of the creatures he's bringing back. B.D. Wong manages to portray this ignorance as well in his one and only scene, until they decided to half-ass it upon his return. This is where Ellie gets through to John and he finally wakes up.
I am awake.
What?
The ice cream is another nice nod to the novels, as in the books, Hammond hosts Henry in his personal bungalow, where they eat ice cream as the park begins to fall apart, which frustrates Henry as he wants to go investigate the DNA of the dinosaurs to find out why they are breeding. Laura Dern is only 25 years old here, holding her own in a scene with a cinema legend. Laura is the child of 2 actors, but unlike most born into nepotism, she clearly had the chops. And do you know who you guys have to thank for Laura Dern playing Dr. Sattler? Nicolas Cage. I didn't know this before I started writing and researching for the script, but it turns out that when Spielberg had initially offered her the role of Dr. Sattler, Laura was initially hesitant. Laura was more interested in smaller independent films at the time and was concerned about going into a major blockbuster, until a certain former co-star of hers convinced her that it was a good idea. Laura had starred alongside Cage in the 1990 film Wild at Heart. The two had become good friends while working on the movie together, and have remained good friends after. It was during this time that Cage encouraged Laura to accept the role. Nicolas Cage is a known dinosaur nut, so it is most certainly believable. The man bought a Tarbosaurus skull for $276,000, which turned out to have been stolen from the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and so Cage returned the skull once finding out its origins. Nicolas Cage tangent over. Back in the tree, Alan and the kids get a well-known visitor, and we get a cute scene for the kids. Some great levity and another example of Winston's magnificent talent at work. After they climb out of the tree, the film finally reveals that the dinosaurs are breeding. In the novel, Alan comes across the raptor eggs when they are near the 6th Stegosaurus early on, and this is what prompts Henry to want to go check the dinosaur DNA in the first place. Alan repeats Malcolm's quote from earlier as we cut back to Control, and Malcolm is posted up like he's Adam in the Sistine Chapel. Arnold is hesitant to restart the entire system just like in the novel. They float the idea of the lysine contingency to stop the spread of the animals, and good lord, here's another issue I have with the movie movie and the novel, the way Muldoon says this.
What about the lysine contingency? We could put that into effect.
Put it into effect? The lysine contingency is already in effect. The animals are born with this quote-unquote faulty enzyme. All animals have to take in lysine to survive, so the people who designed Jurassic Park didn't realize there are naturally lysine-rich foods in the environment. The lysine contingency is pointless. They decide to reset the system to try and fix whatever Nedry did. Arnold resets the system, and it seems to have worked except the lights are still out. He says the shutdown must have tripped the circuit breakers, which requires the breakers to be manually reset from the shed. And this is where we say goodbye to Sam Jackson for the rest of the film. Alan and the kids are just casually walking back to the visitor center as opposed to the Jungle River cruise in the novel. They witness a herd of Gallimimus running away from something. They take cover and witness Rexy crash out of the trees, hunting down one of the galleys. Being in the daylight, I'm surprised that this scene still looks rather well. This is a scene reworked of Alan and the kids witnessing Rexy hunt a herd of Maiasaur in the novel after a breakout. Crichton's novel features the Maiasaur, while Spielberg made the Parasaurolophus the film's Hadrosaur representation.
Fifth iteration. Flaws in the system will now become severe. Ian Malcolm.
Back in the emergency bunker, they come to the conclusion that Arnold didn't make it, and we get a great line from Malcolm that is not from the books.
Yeah, but John, if the Pirates of the Caribbean breaks down, the pirates don't eat the tourists.
Unfortunately, it is then almost immediately undercut by another cringe moment for me rewatching these movies. John says,
It ought to be me really going.
Why?
And when he said this first line, my natural thought was, oh, he thinks it should be him risking his life and not Ellie because he's ultimately responsible for all this. But no. Instead he says,
Well, I'm, and you're,
Look,
Come on, let's go.
we can discuss sexism and survival situations when I get back.
How about new?
Essentially, he's trying to say, I'm a man and you're a woman. This joke, if you can call it that, went over my head when I was a kid. The film is giving Hammond a redemption arc of sorts. This line always confused me. Not only is he a naive dreamer, but he is also a sexist. It doesn't hit like the one in the books. Gennaro assumes Dr. Sattler is a woman when he is on the phone with Dr. Grant. So when they finally meet in person, Gennaro's first response is, you're a woman. Sattler says,
These things happen.
which is actually a very well set up joke, and I genuinely laughed the first time I heard this. My face is literally Malcolm's watching this scene. Ellie and Muldoon head out past the raptor pen to see that resetting the system to fix the problem Nedry created had even more unforeseen consequences. Who would have thought? It turned off the raptor fences. The raptors have escaped. The game has changed. Grant and Muldoon's worst nightmare has become a reality. As Ellie and Muldoon approach the maintenance shed, Muldoon realizes the jig is up and the raptors have them in their sights as he sees one straight ahead. If only Ellie had remembered what Grant said to that kid about how raptors hunt at the beginning of the movie. She could have told Muldoon that the raptors want Muldoon to see him, because...
It's a trap! It's a trap! Also, who's cat?
Muldoon quietly but intensely says,
Go, now!
Ellie starts parkouring through the jungle terrain to the maintenance shed, alongside strikingly loud and off-putting music, and it's incredibly intense. Shout out to John Williams. Ellie does realistic action stunts. No unrealistic stunts to try and one-up half the population are required because the stunts are not the point of the scene. The whole point of the sequence is to convey Ellie's fear and panic to the audience as she rushes to the maintenance shed. I love the nice little touch at the end when she reaches the door and the camera continues to creep up on her to make the audience feel her incredible sense of urgency to get inside the shed and close the door. Ellie gets on the radio with Hammond and we get an intense parallel sequence going back and forth between Alan and the kids attempting to climb a powered down fence while Ellie is attempting to turn that power back on. Alan and the kids also climb a fence in the books, although it is much earlier right after the Rex attack and there is no dramatic electrocution moment like in the movie. Shout out to Ralph. This sequence balances the levity and also intensity as the film has Ellie take Grant's novel role of turning the power back on. In the novel, Ellie helps distract the raptors with Muldoon while Alan goes to turn the power back on, but here the timeline of the events is a bit different, so it works and also leads to a great horror set piece. In the movie, Ellie turns the power back on while Tim is still on the fence, and Tim becomes a human piece of toast. Another moment that I have to suspend my disbelief because jokes aside, that kid should be cooked. As horrifying as Arnold's death scene is in the novel, the film delivers the same feeling incredibly well here. From the first jump scare to the pipe seeing the raptor's full face and claws, Ellie shutting the kid cage door as it goes to pounce. And of course, who can forget about how they revealed Arnold's death with his severed arm landing on her shoulder? The way this film manages to show very horrifying deaths while hiding a good portion of the gore is quite impressive. The raptor rips through the cage, and Ellie has to once again run for her life, while having what I assume is a sprained ankle, and it is still more realistic than heels. Out in the jungle, Muldoon is still alive. Muldoon sets his sights on the raptor he saw and sets up for the shot. The camera pans to Muldoon's side, and the blur begins to fade as we come to one of the most memorable scenes from this movie. It's kind of tragic that Muldoon is most remembered for a moment that isn't even in the novel. The Clever Girl scene was made by screenwriter David Koepp and Steven Spielberg. Don't get me wrong, it is a really well done moment. It's a great callback to Alan's speech from earlier about the raptor's hunting tactics, but a lot of people don't talk about Muldoon's character beyond this moment, and it's a shame. As Muldoon is killed, we cut back to Alan attempting to revive Tim, which shouldn't happen, but the scene isn't completely ruined for me. The acting is still great from Ariana and Sam, which really helps sell it, and of course the dialogue is still great.
I'm gonna count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Sixth iteration. System recovery may prove impossible. Ian Malcolm.
Alan and the kids finally arrive back at the visitor center. Alan drops the kids off to eat while he decides to wander back outside and starts yelling for Ellie randomly. Alan, go grab a megaphone. I'm sure that won't end badly. I love how Alan didn't even grab a single bite of food. This man must live off of like one ham sandwich a day or something. Ellie sees him and they embrace each other, reunited at last. The kids are eating their preferred dishes as Lex realizes they are not alone. I'm glad she learned not to scream out loud. The kids enter a nearby kitchen to escape the raptors. As we prepare for another memorable scene from this movie, the raptor comes to the door window, and the breath effect is just another detail that adds to the realism. Alan gets strapped, and later on we'll see when this franchise immediately goes down the route where every character just either doesn't know how to use a gun or just doesn't use it for reasons. Ellie says that they should be fine as long as the raptors haven't figured out how to open doors, as we cut to the raptors opening a door. A simple but effective transition. Spielberg uses reflective surfaces, stainless steel counters, and creative angles to amplify the tension of this scene. In the film, Lex is older, so she helps with a more active role in outsmarting the raptors. Lex hides in a cabinet, and one raptor is fooled by a reflection in the steel, which proceeds to run headfirst into it. She also helps Tim slam the freezer door on one of them after he has baited it in. Book Tim lures a single raptor who enters the kitchen into the freezer and slams the door on it by baiting it in with stakes. The kids rush out of the kitchen and reunite with a gun-toting Alan and Ellie. They head to the control room, where Alan tells Ellie to boot up the door locks, as Alan and the camera pan back up for a great shot of the raptor's face as she attempts to get into the control room. This is another scene that was kind of ruined for me when I got older. Alan tells Ellie to start reaching for the gun, when they could just ask him to run over and hand it to them. He's just standing there. Also, Ellie is not helping at all with leverage for the door, being on the side with the hinges. She should at the very least be standing right behind Alan, pushing on the side of the door with the handle. This is the stuff you don't realize at the time, because by this point in the movie, Spielberg has done such an amazing job of having sucked you into the film, you're more focused on Lex trying to reboot the security system. Another shout out to Oppenheimer. The actors absolutely sell this scene despite the flaws. Lex is revealed computer savvy earlier in the movie, so this was inevitable. She gets the security system back online, and Alan calls Hammond. Ellie shouts to Alan that the raptor is about to jump through the glass, and we get a very intense moment of acting from Richard Attenborough. He went 100% for this one. Alan is a dumbass who doesn't know how to use a gun, so he drops the gun and they start climbing up into the ceiling as the raptor crashes through the window. This whole ending set piece with the group attempting to escape the raptors is intense. It becomes so chaotic until finally the raptors do have them surrounded. And what better way to end than with the two main antagonistic forces of the movie finally colliding? Unfortunately, this scene has been reused again and again in this franchise. Every time it has gotten more and more ridiculous and unnecessary. Rebirth had the perfect setup for a scene like this with the Spinosaurus and the Mosasaurus, but they decided to throw in an insane symbiotic relationship to try and up the ante. And I imagine when that movie comes out, the characters are going to somehow escape the situation through insane, unrealistic means that would make the Fast and Furious blush. With Rexy and the Raptors preoccupied with one another, the group rushes out the front doors as Hammond pulls up in the Jeep with Malcolm. And we get my favorite line from Alan, which couldn't be delivered in a novel, seeing as Alan and Hammond would never speak again.
Mr. Hammond, after careful consideration, I've decided not to endorse your park.
We cut back to Rexy coming out victorious as the banner falls in front of her. Spielberg's great sense of irony is an amazing final shot of what would ultimately change the movie industry forever. For better and for worse.
Seventh iteration. Increasingly, the mathematics will demand the courage to face its implications. Ian Malcolm.
Oh, Jurassic. Oh, how appropriate. The movie ends on a very somber note with Hammond looking out as he hears the sound of the Brachiosaurus. The first dinosaur we heard when we arrived is the last one we hear as we leave. In the helicopter, Hammond stares at the mosquito and Amber on his cane, contemplating his mistakes while his grandkids sit across from him, still attached to Dr. Grant's hip. Ellie stares at Alan in amazement. Alan's time spent with the children has changed him, and he is seemingly admitting that she was right in the beginning. Kids aren't so bad. Alan stares out at a pelican, realizing that while John Hammond and everybody was in a rush to bring back the dinosaurs, they didn't appreciate the ones that had been there all along. And the end. Nobody else thought of doing something stupid like creating a dinosaur theme park in San Diego. Jurassic Park is not a perfect film, no film is, but it is a pinnacle landmark and groundbreaking special effects. And you want to know the crazy thing? The dinosaurs only have 15 minutes of total screen time, about 9 minutes of which is Stan Winston's amazing animatronics, and 6 minutes was the CGI created by ILM. Modern day blockbusters seem to have visual effects in every frame, but this small amount of screen time in Jurassic Park was so memorable because of the passion, love, and care that went into it from Winston, ILM, and everybody else involved.
That is amazing, and that's what, we're here for. And I think one of my satisfactions about Jurassic Park is we'd use this computer technology in the service of storytelling.
They're moving in herds. They do move in herds.
While I may have some issues with Crichton's writing style, I cannot deny the influence this man had on cinema and on my childhood. It was fun having an excuse to reread the Jurassic Park book again and rewatch the movie for this. That sentiment is going to be lost as we get further into this franchise, until they literally started doing kids' cartoons, and it becomes a dinosaur version of the Paw Patrol. I can only sit through so much of Camp Cretaceous before they introduce the dumbass robotic dogs and dinosaur death matches. Which is a criticism because it is my biggest problem with what this franchise has become. Thankfully, the next movie I still find enjoyable despite its many flaws. I was hoping to have all 6 movies done before Rebirth, but that definitely isn't happening. Either way, I will be reviewing Rebirth here on my channel day 1. If you listened this far, thank you. Please leave a comment with your favorite moment from this film, or if you disagree with some of my takes, then also leave a comment about that as well, and subscribe. And I'll see you for my next video, which will be on The Lost World. If you're holding your breath for my Rings of Power Season 2 reviews, get back to me once they renew it for Season 3.